Hello, Brad. Where's this one played out of?
So this is a 2-5 hand out of Monarch Blackhawk in Colorado.
And what's the max buy-in?
So this is 2K cap, but we're at 1450. The villain's the effective stack at 1450 this hand.
2,000 buy-in at 2.5. Wow, that's a deep buy-in.
It is. I'm not a huge fan of it personally. It seems like a lot of the good regs are the only ones playing that deep, but
Do they run other 2.5 games like that have a smaller cap or something?
the only other 2-5 in town is Match the Stack as well, so it also gets pretty deep.
So it's kind of like a Texas type of thing. It's just interesting because of the way that sometimes these games are set up. I would imagine then there's probably not a whole lot of 510 that's ever running then in town, right?
Usually weekends and then like Tuesdays they're on a 510. That one's huge. It's uncapped. 2-5, I'd say most of the hands are probably closer to 1,000 effective usually.
Okay. So 2.5, 1,400 effective. Okay. Mm-hmm.
This is seven-handed. Under the gun, opens for 15. The low jack calls next to act. I have jack of spades, 10 of spades on the button, and I put in the squeeze here to 65. I think it's maybe a hair small, but I think it's okay.
So seven-handed under the gun to 15, low jack calls, hero with jack 10 of spades, pulls the squeeze to 65, which is about 3x plus the dead money. Yeah, I mean, you could go a little bit larger here, but you're going 3x plus the dead money. I mean, you actually like to play large pots from in position. It's interesting because sometimes we talk about making it huge from out of position to sort of cut people. They're talking about for 3-bet size and cut people sort of set mining odds away. I don't have an issue with it. Just for me, when I'm playing this deep, my bet sizes tend to be a little bit on the larger side. Obviously, you're playing like almost 300 big blinds deep. So you go to 65 with jack 10 of spades. Okay.
Yep, and this is definitely a spot where I'll flat a lot as well, but I had a pretty good image at this point in the session, so went for the squeeze. And then small blind is a fun player, pretty big fish. He cold calls, and then it folds back around. So I'm heads up with the small blind.
So only the small blind cold calls.
Correct.
Interesting. Under the gun and the low jack, who both, under the gun open, low jack call, they both fold. And only the small blind cold calls. And, I did a hand on the flagship podcast a couple weeks ago, and I'm definitely going to review it here, where it was like one of the few times that I cold called the 3-bet. I actually cold called the 3-bet with king, queen suited on the button. And I was like, man, what does my cold calling range look like to 3-bets? Because it's pretty rare. Now, the deeper you are, the more it probably becomes theoretically okay. Maybe not from the small blind necessarily with people in behind you. Like this could probably never be okay because he'd want to drive the people out. But what does a cold calling 3-bet cold calling of a 3-bet range look like? Obviously, if you say that he is like a fun player, it can be a lot wider than this. But it's a lot of like 10s and jacks, which I find kind of interesting because you block those, right? And then like some ace king off and maybe ace queen suiteds typically, maybe some king queen suiteds and ace jack suited types of holds, maybe some like nines through queens from some people, stuff like that. That's what I look at cold calling ranges. But if he's fun, I mean, obviously it could be even wider than that, right?
Yeah, I think you can have quite a few hands here. I think he wasn't necessarily passive pre-flop, so I think he'll probably put in the cold 4-bet with ace king, probably ace queen suited, those type of hands. And
you think you would? Okay.
Queens plus.
Yeah. Okay.
So he's a fun player. He's pretty wide pre, but he's not a super passive.
Okay. Cool. All right. So your head's up and the pot is like probably 160 or something like that.
Yep. I have it 160. Going to the flop after a rake. The flop comes 9 of spades, 6 of spades, 3 of spades.
It's 9 of spades, 6 of spades, 3 of spades. You have jack 10 of spades. So you flop a flush. Now, obviously, you could be loving life here because it's much, much different than what I would say would be like a different setup here would be like, say you opened from the button, right? And this guy called in the big blind. Like he can have a lot of suited hands. I mean, I would still be loving life. Here, the range is, even if he's a fun player, is a little bit more sort of compact. I mean, you've got jack 10 of spades, so I don't know if he cold calls with stuff like ace X of spades, like all the way down, like ace 4, ace deuce of spades, things like that. But you're not going to see like super, super wide things where you shouldn't, like 10 deuce of spades or something like that. But, you're kind of left with king, queen of spades, ace, queen, spades, stuff like, but you have a jack and the 10 in your hand. So you were probably pretty happy, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been playing with this guy for probably 4 or 5 hours at this point. I do think he does have pretty much every suited ace in range here.
You do? Okay. Okay. Well then, then I mean, not that you're ever going to fold. I mean, the only thing that I would say about that is if you give this guy like a cold calling range of ace x of spades, and you have jack 10 of spades, he actually is going to have a lot of flushes here that beat you versus ones that you beat him, right? Because there aren't many suited connectors out there with the 9, 6, and 3 out there, right? And he's not playing like up and down, stuff like I said, 10 deuce of spades. So the only thing that you're beating, right, is like, I don't even know if you're beating anything actually when I look at this. Like it's something like 7, 8 of spades because you're losing to like, king, queen, and things like that. So that is one thing of note. Okay.
Yep. And yeah, so all suited aces is what I was thinking, and then also king, queen suited. I don't think he'd be wide enough to play like up and down kings, but yeah. So he actually checks dark before the flop. I don't think there's too much to do on my end here, but bet on the larger side versus a fun player. I go 90 into 160. I miscalculated the pot a little bit here. I meant to go closer to 2/3, but yeah, I went 90 into 160.
Yeah. I mean, and that I would say, so you bet 90, but you probably meant to bet like 120, right? Or 125.
Yeah, 120-ish was probably, yeah.
And I think that would, and I like that play. And I think it's a small deviation, I would say too, in the sense of, well, it's hard to sort of think about this from a theoretical standpoint because this configuration would never happen in a multi-way spot where the small blind should never be cold calling. But I would say sometimes kind of the difference between like as a live value hack, I will bet larger on boards that maybe theory might say that you're supposed to bet, kind of on the smaller side, like monotone low boards. Oh, this one's not all that connected. So I can definitely get on board with a larger bet. Okay, so you go 90.
Yep, and he calls fairly quickly.
So calls. And the other thing that's interesting here is that because it's a 3-bet pot, you don't get a whole lot of offsuit aces here that are just that somebody has. And what I mean by that is like just an offsuit ace that's not, the flop nut flush. You've got ace king with the ace of spades, ace queen with the ace of spades, maybe ace jack with the ace of spades, and ace 10. I don't know if he calls those hands. I mean, and if he does call those hands offsuit, then there's a bunch of them. And if he goes down and he calls with like king jack, king queen, there could be some high hands here, like high 1 spade hands that shouldn't be there, cold calling a 3-bet. But if you say he's a fun player, maybe he has it. So 90 in a call pot's 340, okay?
Yep, and yeah, this guy, I do think he has a bunch of single spade Broadway hands, probably all the way down to ace 10, just an estimate on what I've been seeing playing with him for 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he calls quickly. The turn is the jack of hearts.
Okay.
He checks again, and I go 275 into 340 here.
So you go pretty large, 275 into 340. And I think that's probably fine. I mean, because you have a jack in your hand, there is there's obviously less combos of jack. Because I mean, that's one of the things I was talking about with jack could be, a hand that somebody had here, cold calling a 3-bet. You have a jack in your hand, so it's less likely. So it's interesting because it's like, I can kind of see this going weirdly like the opposite way of theory where you could almost go and thinking about this, you could almost go and bet full pot on the flop and then he calls. And then on the turn, my only concern here is if you go so large, right? Are you just getting him to fold out like king, queen with the king of spades? I might actually not go this big on the turn. Now, if he's got the ace of spades in his hand, he's always going to call no matter what. But I just, it's very, very counterintuitive because we think about like betting, small on the flop and then larger as the streets progress, especially on the turn. But because it's this sort of cold call 3-bet setup, I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do with my hand and what I think that basically he has, not necessarily as some trolls will come in and say, well, you have to make the same bet. You're playing against his range. Like you're supposed to like, bet like it's got nothing to do with your hand. You're playing against his range. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll make more money than you in live poker and you can play against his range. Anyways, so you bet 275. So you bet 275, okay. And?
Yep, and he calls pretty quickly again. Doesn't think about it too much one way or the other.
Call again. All right, small one calls. And now we are at, what, 890? Something like that?
Yep. Have it at 890.
Okay. All right, so 963 all spades, hero game, jack 10 of spades, 3 bets the button, small blind cold calls, flops a flush, bets 90, gets called, turns to jack of hearts, 963 jack, check, hero bets 275, small blind calls, pot's 890, okay?
So I guess just real quick before we move on to the river, you think maybe like something closer to half pot would be better for the turn to keep in those single spade broadways?
Well, actually, though, as somebody points out, what I did not necessarily just click in my head is that because the turn's a jack, I think what I said would have more merit if it was some other card, like if it was a 5 or something like that. But now that I think of it, the turn's a jack, right? So if he's got king queen, it's a gut shot too. So I think I can actually get on board with your sizing. It's just something that just didn't hit me like right away, just because of the texture of that card. Like probably gives. I mean, you have the jack of spades, so he can't have pair plus flush draw. But if something's giving somebody like some sort of additional equity because of a gut shot, then I can probably get on board with it a little bit. As there was a guy in the live chat that pointed that out. So thank you, Potkivich. So I don't mind your bet. But do you see what I'm saying? Like if it was like a 5 or something like that, like the 5 of hearts, something like that.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so pot's 890, okay.
Yep. And the river comes off mostly a blanked 5 of clubs.
Oh, so there's the 5. Okay, 5 of clubs, yep.
So 890 in the pot, and this is where it gets interesting. He leads into me for 450.
Well, so small blind leads for 450.
Yep.
So based upon what I said about, remember the conversation that we had about how this guy constructs his pre-flop sort of cold calling 3-bet range here? Remember that question I said, do you think that this guy has a lot of like ace X of spades? And you said yes, right?
Yeah.
Then I think that this one isn't even close. Like I think I make a very, very snap decision here. Now, what do you think? See, if you were Michael G, because sometimes Michael G, like moderator extraordinaire, he will, he'll text me hands on the side for his podcast, and then I'll give him like a little quiz, like a private quiz. I'll be like, Mike, well, it's a very easy decision. Like I would do something very, very quick. It would be a snap decision for me. And then he'll take like, 15, 20 minutes to get back to me thinking about it. But this one here, I think is a very, very obvious decision. Now, what decision do you think that would be based upon what I had said in the beginning of the hand?
Based on that, I think square call.
Square call. Because how many flushes, like he's either going to have he's either running a bluff, right? He's either running a bluff or he, where he missed with the ace of spades, or he has a higher flush than you. Now, I will say, there's one caveat to this that if he were to go check call with like pocket nines, I mean, was that going through your head ever? Because you block jack, like we said.
Definitely, yeah. I think the big thing I was thinking about in game is that I do think this guy calls off with sets, and I do think he does cold call probably. I'd give him probably 4 combos of 6s and 3s and then 9s in full.
You think he has 6s and 3s here too?
6s and 3s in full, maybe not 3s, but I do think he cold calls it. He was active pre-flop, probably close to 70% VPIP, something like that. But I did discount those donking the river.
You discounted those donking the river, right? Yeah, because it's like, because that's not like a really, even if we can debate all day whether he has these hands in pre-flop, but I mean, he has to have these hands and then take this line, which is not really all that common, right? Of what, check call,
right?
Like it would almost be like he had to be playing it scared, right? Like he's waiting for safe cards, and then when you run into people like that, they usually don't even bet the river. You know what I mean? Like they're just check calling to check call. So I don't think it's all that likely. So did you call?
I did. I thought about it for probably 90 seconds, and I did end up just flatting.
Mm-hmm.
I did fast roll because he's a fun player.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to give off a nit roll or anything, and he just bemoaned how lucky I was and mucked. So didn't get a reveal, unfortunately. But
oh no, and it's obviously not your fault, Brad. But so I mean, the reveal is the fact that you had the best hand, anyways, right? And it almost like it's like he's bluffing. There was a guy that was like he went nuts on we do our shorts videos, like he wants to bring my channel down and says I'm losing viewers and is praying for like not a good future for this channel and he's hoping for ill will for me. Seems like even personally, because I keep putting up hands where there aren't reveals. Like that was his big complaint in life, is that we put up hands sometimes without reveals. And I'm like, oh God, okay. I'll be careful. But I mean, it's not like he was going to come out and attack me. It was just like, Jesus, how much time do people have like in the day? But the reveal here, of course, is the fact that, you know, he's just mocking, right? I mean, I don't think, like, I think he would have showed you a set if he had one. You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah.
I think this is a bluff. It's a bluff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could call and he could muck. Okay, dude who doesn't like our shorts for not doing the reveal, pretend like Brad called and the player mucked instead of Brad fast rolling, right? And turning over your hand. No, I mean, one of the other things too, I always say when, you know, as a technique, I do believe in fast rolling, you know, obviously your hand. Like if the guy said good call, I do, you know, I feel strong. You should just turn your hand over. People can debate all day with me on that. But if you do want to see the guy's hand and you do go with my approach where when someone says, you know, good call, you just turn your hand over, you can still just call and don't do what you did, Brad. Like call and wait for the guy. You know, don't call and then just turn your hand over. If he says good call, okay, fast roll your hand, but you don't know what he's going to do. You could just call and then wait to see if he turns his hand over.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you very much for the call, Brad.